Well, last we left off was talking to you guys about smoking jackets. It does, doesn't it? Smoking jackets. Remember we talked about this? Yes, I am. Yeah, it's tuxedo. Just fancy looking, you know? Loud patterns. And to finish up, I told you I was going to get back to this. You guys might remember I took you guys on a tour around the school. We were talking about architecture and like the elaborateness that went into like the woodwork, things like that. This is the kind of decorating I'm talking about. This is what's going on in a well-to-do home. Again, everything's set up for this explicit purpose of providing the ability to close off rooms, to create these compartmentalized spaces, but also you can open everything up and kind of have more of an open concept sort of thing. That's the reason pocket doors were so popular. You just kind of slide them out of the way and bam, they're gone. Even smaller houses would have those. I remember when I was back in the days of looking for a house to buy, I found a farmhouse for sale that had basically this giant set of oak, of pocket doors just in the middle of the house, so you could actually like close it off. And we loved that house. The only reason we didn't buy it was because it needed a new roof, a new foundation, and all the siding was gone. So basically, I think they were wanting $75,000 for the house. We estimated it would take about $130,000 to fix it. So, I mean, it's totally like it was a huge house. Like once that was done, it would totally be worth more than that. But we just didn't have the time or the money to make that happen. So, but that's not here and there. The idea that was the architecture. It takes a lot of its design characteristics from the Palace of Versailles, just in terms of what we call loudness, the decoration, the glitziness, things like that. But again, this is sort of that Victorian design. Speaking of, we talk about Victorian this, Victoria. Now let's talk about Queen Victoria. Hey. Where are you? She's an interesting lady. Queen Elizabeth, eh? Fun stuff. First of all, understand that Victoria's legacy is going to be of such paramount importance that the entire culture of her kingdom revolves around her styling and her opinions. She sees the British Empire to its greatest height that it has ever known. People often say, well, Elizabeth had it during the golden years. No, not even close. Victoria's England was the empire of the world. And so we're going to see how she had these influences. Looking at her life story. First of all, she was an unlikely queen. She was sixth in line for succession. This meant that there were 5 people potentially in front of her to get the throne. And basically due to circumstance, all those people died off. So she ended up gaining the throne. However, her uncle, who was the King of England, didn't want her to become king or queen before she turned 18. The reason wasn't because he was being mean, it's because if that happened, she wouldn't be queen for 4 years. Basically, this happened around the time she was 14. And he really, really hated her mother. He did not get along with Victoria's mother at all. And we're going to see Victoria's mom did some kind of skeezy things. So basically, he just kind of he said, I'm just going to try to live until she's 18 and then I can die. And that's exactly what happened. Now, Victoria, growing up, had a very lonely childhood. She was sequestered from all other children and basically was educated well, but otherwise was kept from meeting many people at all. So it was fairly lonely. The reason that happened was her mother didn't want her to grow any relationships with anybody else because she wanted to control her daughter, basically acting as queen through her daughter. This was basically due to the idea of this one guy whose name I don't remember, imagine that.
who was rumored to be Victoria's mother's lover. So there was all that kind of scandal going on with it. And basically, Victoria had a really bad relationship with her mom because of it. However, Victoria was kind of headstrong. She would not listen to her mother. Like her mother's like, oh, point this person to cabinet. No. And just was stuck to it. And due to tradition, she had to live with her mother until she got married. And basically, she had a really antagonistic relationship with her mother, and so she was kind of like, well, that's a bit extreme. I have to get married to get out of this. But eventually, she does get married to a guy she met twice. Technically 3 times. Met once when she was 14, once when she was 18, and once on the wedding day. So imagine that. You have a choice if you're going to marry, but you're going to meet him like twice, and you got to make that decision. Yeah. It's a bit chilly back there. How you guys been up here? Is it okay up here? You guys over here okay? Okay. That's cool. I just want to make certain that the room is equalized before I shut it. That's a nice breeze going right there. So anyways, back to the story. So Victoria meets this guy named Albert. Her uncle actually favored a union with him because of his family being I think the rulers of Hanover. I could be wrong on that. That doesn't actually sound right. So don't know. He was German. Anyways. And basically what happened was she actually really, really liked him and he liked her. So it was, promising, things like that. His name was Albert, Prince Albert. And he ended up marrying her. Oh, and by the way, they were first cousins. Yeah, that's not terribly uncommon, though. I will say this, though. Their love story was actually one that was kind of legendary. She was deeply in love with him and he her. And the thing is, he doesn't pull a Prince Hans. He doesn't try to take over the throne through marriage. Rather, he just kind of helps her be a queen, which is really kind of interesting because Victoria had this kind of attitude of like, well, he's the man, he should be leading, and he's like, but you're the queen, so you should be one making decisions. So he kind of helped her and took like the slack whenever she had problems, but otherwise, kind of stayed out of it. It's kind of interesting reading their letters and reading their diaries and things like that. We know that they fought. And what's funny is there was one fight that got so bad. What was it that happened? There was something that basically he refused to talk to her about it because essentially he said she was being irrational, which is hilarious because that's the same kind of argument you hear today from a couple. These are royalty, they're just like everyday people. Specifically what it was is the nanny who Victoria wanted to use for raising her children was the same nanny that she had, and Albert said she was utterly incompetent. Kind of harsh, right? Well, it turns out he was kind of right. She ended up fleeing the country afterwards, and basically because of his standing in, basically all of their children survived, which just didn't happen. Like, it was very rare to have that many children survive. That's why he had such big families. They had 9 kids together, and all of them survived into adulthood. So that's like, whoa, huge family, right? The other thing that's kind of interesting about Albert is that he was fairly liberal and progressive. He wanted to change a lot of things. So Victoria had some image troubles early on. She was seen as kind of naive and as being, at worst, actively difficult to work with Parliament. And so he kind of smoothed things out, and he actually helped improve the relationship between Victoria and his mother. So he was kind of like this ideal husband kind of character. And she, in turn, kind of learned quite a bit from him. She ended up becoming a pretty good leader, smoothing things out. And a lot of the problems we see with the Industrial Revolution, leading to revolution, stuff like that, didn't happen in England. She did have her fair share of detractors. I think someone tried to assassinate her 5 different times, or not the same dude. That'd be kind of like, dude, really? Keep letting this dude out of jail? 5 different people tried to assassinate her, and all of them obviously failed. But nevertheless, it was, not everyone was all totally in love with her. The thing when everything kind of changes, though, is when her husband died. Albert died. People think it might have been a form of cancer or possibly some type of illness of the stomach. He had stomach problems, but we're not really sure. However, we do know that after he died, she was totally distraught. She wore black for the rest of her life. which was actually quite long. She lived, I think, 86 or something like that, which was just tremendously long for that era. And the first 2 years after Albert's death, she basically refused to appear in public, and the people started kind of, talking down to her, and at one point someone put a big sign on the front of Buckingham Palace that said, "The space for rent. We haven't seen the owner for some time." So people were getting kind of surly with her, and eventually her advisors encouraged her to be out in public, and then when she reemerged, that's what cemented her legacy. Specifically, under her and Albert, the monarchy became less of a hammer force to make everybody do what they wanted to do. It was more of a paternalistic or maternalistic office that was, we're like the mother of the country and we're trying to take care of everybody. This sort of attitude made her incredibly popular, and people started emulating her. And these kind of virtues, the Victorian virtues, were seen as the most important aspects of society and are kind of the cultural ideals everyone was measuring their life to. The first and most important was reputation. Basically, this is what everybody thinks about. The Victorians were very gossipy, so if you did something wrong, it would reflect badly on you, and that would stick with you forever. And the thing is, it wasn't just reflected on you, it was also reflected on your family. So it was this family tradition that, you might have a brother who was kind of weird, like he was in a circus, we don't talk about him, stuff like that. It was all about trying to avoid embarrassment. For instance, Albert, before he died, had to go rush off to Ireland because his youngest son, I believe it was having an affair with an Irish actress, and this was just totally improper. You don't do that. And so he had to give him he was literally yelling at him in his dormitory at college. Quit sleeping around with the Irish type of thing. Also, this was, we'll get more repetition. Hard work, like I said, it's a very Protestant attitude. Everyone needs to work hard, things like that. Built up from the bootstraps. Etiquette is, of course, what? Proper manners, yes. You guys have probably heard of the whole thing, pinky up when you're drinking tea? Right. That is a bucket, drop in the bucket. Very, very small thing in terms of etiquette. We are actually going to be doing an experiment next week involving Victorian etiquette. But we'll deal with that later. Let me just say a couple of rules of Victorian etiquette that were not ever broken. First of all, you always refer to someone by their last name. Title would be whatever title was appropriate. Mr., Ms., or Mrs., Doctor, so on and so forth. First name basis was only for in private, and only between very close people. If you called someone by their first name, that was a gesture of saying we're really close buds, we're besties. And, it could be appropriate in certain circumstances, i.e., you might remember back in first semester we watched Master and Commander, and how one guy, captain says, "Congratulations, Tom." The captain was acknowledging his second command as an equal. That was kind of a big moment. He's like, "Wow, you called me by first name. This is awesome," and things like that. And that was the same sort of attitude. Probably the biggest, most difficult thing that we would have if we were in the Victorian era to deal with is people did not use contractions. Ever. No, couldn't, shouldn't, wouldn't, none of that. Should not, could not, would not. So, proper diction, things like this. These, like I said, very, very small. There's all kinds of things about how one properly goes about various behaviors and politeness. Polite matters, society, because it reflects, again, on your behavior, and someone who's rude, gets around. The nuclear family, you guys familiar with what the nuclear family is? Your immediate family, brothers, sisters, that sort of thing, not cousins or uncles or that sort of stuff. One's place in society, basically what your role is. You should be acting as your role dictates, not beneath your station. So fraternizing with people beneath you reflects poorly upon you, poorly on your education. In particular, there was this kind of movement in the Victorian era that a woman's place was taking care of her family. That's called the cult of domesticity. Domestic refers to the house, the cult of the home. Basically, a woman's place is in the house. That whole attitude that you hear about today, where a woman's place is in the house and cook and clean up everything, it comes out of Victorianism. Technically, it actually comes out of the rebirth of Victorianism in the 1950s, but it's still the same. Finally, morality. Being a moral citizen. Now, here's the thing that's funny about morality is what is morality? Morality is subjective to the culture which you're part of. What we're talking about is Protestant morality, specifically propriety. How one deals with their relationships, treats business partners, things like that. Furthermore, one of the things that Albert really instilled and brought to the country was an attitude that the nobility, it was their job to help the workers beneath them. It became sort of this element of duty. And so that's going to be one of the things that helps alleviate some of the problems of the Industrial Revolution. So all these were the Victorian attitudes that people emulated of Victoria's rule. And she kind of becomes this figurehead for the country. And still to this day, like the Queen of England is a figurehead for many Commonwealth countries, Canada, et cetera, et cetera. So again, she kind of elevates the office to something different. Oops, sorry. That is a pair of reenactors portraying. They actually look freakishly like them in real life. Albert, of course, being the guy, Victoria being the girl. How it goes. But again, most of the time I show pictures. I show this photo is kind of famous of her. Like I said, I think she's about 60 in this photograph. She got kind of portly. Yes.
I don't want to be mean, but is she like a bigger?
Yeah, that's what I was saying, portly.
I know. I don't know. I'm just in this.
She's a bit like a potato.
Yeah, I'm really tiny little, like beautiful.
Yeah, right, and that's the funny thing about the term princess. There were some princesses that were ugly, quite a few. And the thing that's funny is that it's like I always say, it's like I never quite understand people. It's like, why would it be a princess? It's like, why? I mean, princesses don't. I mean, nowadays it's kind of cool because you have wealth and no responsibility, exactly. But for much of history, being a princess really wasn't that great. It meant that you were going to be married off on a marriage of convenience. It's like, oh, we want to form an alliance with this country. You're going to marry that king's son. Doesn't matter. You're 16. He's 59. Happened all the time. That's what being a princess is all about. And by the way, that's my point of earlier. Is Victoria was quite pretty when she was younger. So this is when she's in her 60s. I mean, don't get me wrong. There are some women who are in their 60s. It's like, oh my God, seriously? But yeah, I mean, give the girl a break. I'm just saying. This is after her husband died as well. The thing is like I said, she was utterly distraught by it. She never remarried. There were rumors that she had a relationship with somebody else named Mr. Brown. I don't know if that's really true or not. I mean, this is purely subjective. This is purely from my opinion, so there's no basis whatsoever. Just from what I've read, it doesn't seem to me like that's the case. It's more like they were just really close friends who happened to be of the opposite gender. But then again, there's always people who are weird like that. It's like, oh, you're of the opposite gender? You must have a relationship. So guy and girl can't be friends. It's basically what that said. You know what I'm saying? It's weird. Weird double standards, I guess. Anyways, but yeah, Victoria. She's a cool lady. Let's talk about some other ladies. Emmeline Pankhurst, I might be mispronouncing that name, and Lady Constance Lytton. So both of these are suffragettes, the term for a woman seeking the right to vote. The thing is, a well-behaved woman never really changed anything. A woman just kind of goes with the flow, things like that. It's not really changing anything. To change society, you've got to do things that people question and are scared by. We are creatures of habit. Speak in a second. We want to fit in. We want everything to be normal, and when someone does something that's totally weird and out there, we freak out. Yes.
What did you say you vote for?
Suffragettes is this word right here. So Emmeline Pankhurst does the opposite thing that women are expected to do. She's not all demure and soft-spoken. She goes and smashes windows in. She forms groups of women to go on riots They would break into Parliament and just start shouting votes for women until the police hauled them off to jail. And when they were in jail, they refused to eat. They went on hunger strikes, which we're going to read about tomorrow, as a matter of fact. We're not going to have much time to go over just so I'm going to go ahead and give you kind of the skivvy of what happens. Okay? It's a brutal experience. It's not, I mean, think about it. How can they force you to open your mouth and swallow something? I'll tell you exactly how they do it. They take wooden blocks and a hammer. They put the block between your teeth and they hammer it until your mouth opens. Then they lock your mouth in place. Then they take a tube and they shove it down your throat. Then they pour soup or whatever food items mashed up down your throat, which of course can choke you. You can vomit it up and it gets stuck in your nose, things like that, have trouble breathing. Not to mention the blocks can actually crack your teeth and break them. And by the way, this is actually preferential to what happened in Russia, where they used rubber tubing down the nose to get to the stomach.
Why did they let him swallow?
Because it would look very improper for a prison to let someone kill themselves. Yeah.
They don't even now, do they?
Yeah, but not quite to that extreme. You can feed somebody with IV fluids and things like that. And yeah, they absolutely do have problems with people going on hunger strike. Yeah, you're going to be reading an account of someone undergoing a hunger force feeding later tomorrow. Sorry, what? Question?
Suffragette, you said there was something with voting?
Yeah, suffrage is the right to vote. That's early in your notes. You should already have that. And basically, it was a woman who was seeking women's right to vote. Does that make sense? I'm not really sure what the masculine term is. Suffrage? I don't know. Suffrageer? I don't know. Someone who knows words, I have to tell you that. But yeah, so when I say women fought for the right to vote, I'm not talking like, cutesy fight. I'm not talking like, oh, they were playing. I'm talking they fought. It was on, right? And it was serious business. They had to completely turn convention upside on its head to try to gain this right to vote. It was not easy, and it was brutal, to be honest. And I always like to point that out at the same time while pointing out that so few people actually use their right to vote. You know what I mean? It's really, really sad how few people vote. Let me get right down to it. So I'm going to show you something real quick. It's a cool little app you can look at. Let me think about this. Let's see, we had a 2012, 2016 election. So most of you guys should be ready to vote, I believe, for the next presidential election, yeah? Is that about right? I guess 15, 14? 15, 16, okay. 15, 16. So you're around 18, yeah, so that's about right. Unless I got my years totally wrong, I would not. I'm so sleep deprived. It could be like, yeah, we voted last year. Really? Did we? In 2008, 2016. Yeah, November 7th, I believe, is the date. When do you turn 18, though? Because as long as it's before the end of the year, you can actually vote, even if it's not by that. Let me show you something real quick. So first of all, let's talk about the reasons people don't vote. There's three main reasons people tend to cite as to why they don't vote. It doesn't matter. My vote as in of itself doesn't matter. Fair enough. Your one vote is probably never going to matter. I mean, people will often say, like, what was that one movie where it's like the last man vote counts? It's divided. It doesn't quite work that way. The swing vote doesn't work that way. Odds are good. Your vote's not going to matter for the individual. The problem is how many people do this. Now consider this: 40% or 43% turned out for the last election. So that leaves 57% of the voting population in the United States didn't vote the last presidential election. Okay? So if all those 57 people vote for one person, that person automatically wins. Those 57 people put Mickey Mouse, thinking else would be the President of the United States. Just saying, it would happen. It's how it is. So that whole argument of my vote doesn't count is illogical. It doesn't actually make sense on the grand scheme of things. So that theory is debunked. The second one is I don't have time. You guys know how long it takes to actually vote? Yeah, it doesn't take very long at all. If you vote on party lines, it's make one line, you're done. I'm not even criticizing. People criticize you shouldn't vote along party lines. I'm not going to criticize you. Whoever you vote, that's the freedom of being an American. You can vote for whoever you want. You can vote one party if you want. But I'm just saying, it doesn't take very long. And by the way, you don't have to fill out the entire ballot. Like if it's like, I don't know what judge to vote for, just leave it blank. But vote for the things that really, really matter, like senators, things like that, if you can't be bothered to find out about judges and things like that. So it doesn't take very long, and it's open from early in the morning to 7, I think it is, at night. You can find some time in there. And there's voting places all over the place. Now granted, you have to vote in one place. It's usually right next to your house. Mine, if I were to drive there from my front door, it would take me about 2 minutes to get there. It's in a little church, easy peasy. Some people might have a slightly longer distance, but I guarantee it's no more than 15 minutes. So that's not really a good excuse either. The third one, the one I find most compelling, is I don't know who to vote for. Some people will often say that, well, they're all the same anyways. Well, that's an absolute lie. That is an absolute lie. It is a stupid, lazy argument. Because saying they're all the same, really, so they would all vote exactly the same on every single bill passed. Clearly, that's not true. So, I don't know who to vote for. I don't know who I would agree with. Let me show you a not-for-profit website called Project Vote Smart. You know, we have the power of the internet at our disposal. Project Vote Smart, hang on, back, is a not-for-profit organization that collects data. Their sole objective is to collect information about candidates. Actually, that's not you guys. Let's see if that works. No, that's not doing it. 9 digits. 9 digits. That's ridiculous. Okay, it's not quite working right this particular second the way I think. So let's go over here. Here we go. So right here, you'll see that it's actually a building for 2016. What this is, Vote Easy, is an app that they've created that asks you a series of questions. Usually it's about 10. And it'll have all the candidates in a line, and what it does is ask you a question like, what are your feelings about gun control? Do you believe that guns should be restricted, yes or no? And you click on whatever you think, and it'll say, okay, how important is this to you? And it gives you 1 through 5. Okay, as you go through all these various questions, it'll recommend a candidate to you based upon your answers and their answers. Essentially, the way it works is Project Vote Smart goes through every interview, every speech, every campaign promise that a candidate makes, and they collate that data for you. So, for instance, if you vote for a candidate because of their stance on gun control, you can click on that candidate and see exactly what speeches, where, and when they said that this is what they think. So it's not just a matter of you have to trust the website. You know, it just makes recommendations about what you put in. You can go in and they have all that information already at your disposal. They also incorporate, if it's a senator or someone who's an incumbent or who has been in office before, what votes they have voted yes or no in their particular careers for every time they've ever voted. So if you want to go see how they feel about gun control, you can go through there and click on, okay, this is a vote that had to do with gun control, this is how they voted. All the information is there at your disposal. But you don't have to go through all that information. You can use the vote program, and it takes maybe about 5 minutes, 10 minutes tops to fill out all the questions, and it'll tell you this is what your ballot should look like based upon your responses. Yes.
If like, you didn't, like, you don't know about that, I don't know if you can, this is the question, like, can you vote on, like, the party, like, there's Democrats and.
Yes, party line, yeah, that's what I was talking about at the very beginning, saying that, you can just say Democrat, Republican, everything goes there, and that's done. That takes about 2 seconds.
Then I don't see why people.
I know, that was my point. That's the easiest way. But there are some people who say, well, man, you shouldn't vote just along party lines because, you might not agree with the individual candidates. That's fair. That's what this does.
I would say they watch the thing.
Right. Well, I've done this as an experiment every year since I've found this site. And what always fascinates me is I start with a survey saying, all right, how many guys, if you could, would vote Republican? How many guys would, if you could, vote Democrat? How many guys, if you could, would vote other party? And I take those informations, I set them aside. Then I have them do Vote Smart. And what's funny is, usually there's almost no one who'll vote third party whenever they do it that way. When I start the first way, when they do Project Vote Smart, it tells them that basically over half of the party should be voting third party. Because they don't actually agree with what the Republican or the Democrat would say. But people tend to just vote one party or the other without even thinking about it. See what I'm saying? So Project Vote Smart is a great way of actually having an informed vote without having to do all the legwork. Which, by the way, if you're feeling, well, that seems a bit easy with just one website, which is good instinct, everyone should be a little doubtful with just one website. We have the internet. Every bit of information that's ever been published is at your fingertips, There's nothing stopping you from going out and finding all this information on your own. That's the beauty of the webs. That's the internets, the interwebs. You can find all this information, and it'll tell you these things. So basically what I'm trying to say is there's absolutely no reason you guys shouldn't vote unless you physically cannot. Yes?
Has your, vote, what you voted, been matched, what your results were?
Yeah. A number of times, yeah. I think only one time it wasn't, and that was because I knew already who I was voting for from other unrelated things. Indiana politics is a little weird to follow because, everything over in Indiana is actually focused on Kentucky. So it's kind of funny that way. Anyways, Lady Constance Lytton, and again, you can kind of see from the notes, she was actually a noble who changed her name to protect her family. Again, we talked about how there's that whole reputation thing. Well, being a suffragette was not exactly something you wanted in the family. That was really embarrassing, because suffragettes were doing all these crazy things like going on strikes and hunger strikes, things like that. So basically, she lied to protect her family, sort of like, Lord Caldwell did when he became Rupert Angier in Prestige. Same sort of mentality. I'm going to protect my family. And so that's what she did. She actually died fairly young. I believe it was from late 30s because of this harsh treatment she had in prison. Finally, let's talk about Alfred Dreyfus. You might have remembered we talked about the Dreyfus Affair at the beginning of this section. The Dreyfus Affair was a... Okay. Let me start over because I don't know where I was going with that. One of the things I want to point out long before we ever get to World War II, is that the Holocaust and what happened with the Jews was not the first example of anti-Semitism in Europe. The fact of the matter was there were multiple events that kind of led up to this harsh treatment of Jews. The Dreyfus Affair was one of them. Alfred Dreyfus was a captain in France's army who was the only Jewish officer in France, the only one. And the fact of the matter was, he had a lot of enemies, simply because he was Jewish. And some army officers conspired against him to get him removed by accusing him of being a German spy. They did this by fabricating 2 letters which implicated him as a spy. Now, no one, when he was accused of this, went and actually looked at these letters to see if there was any truth to them. They just convicted him right then and there on the spot, drummed him out of the army, and threw him in prison. It was a humiliating end to a military career that was actually quite distinguished.
Drumming out of the army isn't simply being fired. It's about humiliating the person. Again, because reputation is kind of important. So to put this into perspective, I don't know if you guys have read about this, but there was a guy who was fired from Target not too long ago for allegedly stealing while he was working, stealing from the store. And instead of, handling it quietly and asking him to come see us in the office, hey, this is what we think is going on, they actually called the police. The police showed up, put him in handcuffs, like they arrested him at the register, and put him in handcuffs and led him to the office where they interrogated him, and then threw him back into his back of the squad car and took him to jail, or to prison, jail. And basically he was immediately released and there was no truth to it. He was fired for thieving from the company, but there was no truth to it.
Is that like illegal?
Oh yeah, he sued the hell out of Target. And from my understanding, they just settled flat out. They weren't even going to fight it in court. Because first of all, they can't do that. You can't, it's not just them, it's the police. You don't go arrest someone like that without probable cause. They didn't have that. It was a rumor. So basically way overreacting on it, and I think those officers got a stern talking to for what they did. But the biggest problem is Target did it in front of everybody. If memory, actually, no. What happened was the kid felt so bad about it, he killed himself. Yeah. The family is suing Target, and they settled it. Yeah, I forgot about that particular fact.
Well, I don't see why you do that, because like if I was at a store and like the cash register, the cashier got arrested, I would like think it's bad at the store. Like if there's like criminals working there.
Right, sure, and it doesn't make any sense. Yeah, basically there's no logic to any of this whole thing, but I mean it's a terrible tragedy, and you can imagine how embarrassing it would be to be let off in handcuffs for not doing anything wrong. And then having all your coworkers, who, by the way, might be friends of yours, be like, dude, what's going, things like that. You know what I'm saying? Mess you right up. Okay, that's the same sort of thing that happened to Dreyfus. Dreyfus was led in front of his entire company. It's not company. It's bigger than that. Brigade, maybe? I think it's Brigade. And publicly shamed. Basically, the officers in the command would come up and rip parts of their uniform off while they were standing at attention. And it ended with the head officer breaking the sword of Dreyfus. Which is like, dude, you can just break a sword over your knee? Yes, you can. They're pretty thin, actually. And so basically it was this thing that was meant to humiliate. Well, it turns out this was a divisive thing in France. There were those who said, yeah, the Jew, he's guilty, and there were others like, no, he's a hero. Why would he do this? This is dumb. And Emile Zola was actually one of his greatest supporters. He wrote a book called J'accuse, which is Jacques Hughes. I'm not really sure how to pronounce it. But it was basically a book written that supported Dreyfus, and he got so many death threats, he fled the country. This guy's supporting one side of the argument. Well, it turns out it was re-examined. These letters were put through and shown to be forgeries. So then, guess what the government does? Oh, we're sorry. Well, I guess you can be out of prison. You're a captain again. And continue to serve the army. But I think this should reinforce the point that anti-Semitism was a widespread belief in Europe. And it's going to be one of the main reasons why Zionism, the belief that Jews should have their own country, starts to kind of come into favor. Yes?
Why didn't they just look at the letters in the first place instead of just automatically putting them in jail?
Great question. Basically, anti-Semitism. See, the thing is we are creatures of habit. Human beings want to find patterns in everything. We find patterns in things that there aren't really patterns to. Like, how many human beings will believe that they're rolling lucky? It could be anything from going to the craps table to playing Monopoly. I'm rolling really well tonight. Doesn't mean anything. You're not going to roll more likely better or other. It's totally random, unless you're cheating. I didn't know people cheat Monopoly, but I'm just not here and there. The fact is we find patterns of things. This is where stereotypes come about. One of the things we talk about in sociology about stereotypes is they all have a basis in reality. I think we talked about this yesterday. Is that something there, or is that second period? Did we talk about stereotypes yesterday? Okay, so yes, we did. So the thing is, you'll have people who will see one person out of 100 who is stereotypical, and they will just reinforce their idea that, yeah, they're all like that. Because all it has to do is happen once, and they believe it. This is true for almost every stereotype. What's funny is our society in America, we say that, well, stereotyping is wrong, you shouldn't believe in stereotypes, they're not true. But how many people in the U.S. actually believe stereotypes are accurate? This is something I do in sociology every year. And basically, it's how many of you guys have a stereotype that you believe is absolutely true. You know, being totally honest, and it's almost always 100%. There's always that one stereotype that is true, right? Except it's not. None of them are true. There are truths to stereotypes, but usually they're cultural and it's anecdotal. It's not supportable with fact. It's, you know, again, it tends to not follow reality. But to answer your question, why didn't they look at the letters? They expected treachery from the Jew. This is what they are, they're treacherous. So when you see, oh, there's this or this one, believe it. Great example of that today. Look how many people put stuff on Facebook or Tumblr or whatever social media platform of your choice that's like some ridiculous claim. It's like the real facts behind this, or they have some kind of like statement, and you know it's totally false. I find grandmothers like to do that a lot. Pass something along. You know what I'm talking about? Like there was one I saw the other day about how there was one, I think it was about Obama, that he was going to cut military pensions or something like that. And basically it's like, you know, the president can't do that. That's Congress that's that. Congress sets all the bills and everything, so that doesn't make actually any sense. And, you know, it's just kind of like that sort of thing. Yeah.
So, like, you know how, like, there's the big riots that were going on?
The big what?
So,
Sorry.
like this century. So, like,
The big fights.
yeah, like the riots, like, in different states.
Oh, okay. I just didn't understand what you said.
Whoever got shot, I don't know.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
And so now, like, they got this, that all these teenagers are saying that police just shoot black people, like,
Yeah.
it's like some big thing. Does that count if it's like the people? Yeah, like the, which is totally stupid.
Well, yeah, well, there is a thing that, if you do the studies, you'll find that blacks do get arrested more than whites. It's called racial profile. It's like, let's say I suspect this person might have stolen something, and I'm a cop. Odds are good if that person's black, I'm going to go ahead and arrest him and take him for question if it's a white person. Now, statistically, why is that? That's an interesting question. Generally, it's you know, some cops are racist. Not all cops are, by the way. That's the important distinction. And often what you find is in certain districts you have more racism than others. I mean, this is obvious. And also you have certain cops that are more racist than others. Like there was one cop, he arrested 500 black people. Like way higher than any other cop in this particular district. So that skews the statistics.
I mean, yeah, like there is, of course, there's racism, but like
Yes.
the weird thing is like not all cops are white either, and like
True.
they act like it's like these like mean white men, and like some of them like there's women, and I don't know.
Yeah.
It's just.
But the thing is also it is a problem for racial profiling. It's illegal, but it still happens. You know, we got to get rid of that, and it's a very real problem for the African American community because you know you got to be extra careful out and about. You know, I remember there's a really great statement on NPR. This happened back in the Trayvon Martin case, but you know, they were talking about how
the African American Father Association, something like that. Basically, it was African American fathers talking about how they have to teach their kids, you got to be careful with police because they might think you did something you didn't do. And all it takes is one misunderstanding and bam, something terrible happens. So, it is a significant problem. Again, it's hard to not become carried away and sensationalize and say it like, all people of whatever. You know what I'm saying? That all cops are racist, all, whatever. We tend to over-exaggerate these things. It's the same sort of thing how people will say that this event is the most important in history forever. We exaggerate. It's the human condition. It's what we do. But that doesn't mean it's not a problem either. You know what I'm saying? That's the main distinction. That's why there's this whole debate about police wearing recorders, camcorders, those little tiny button mics, that things are talking about. Why wouldn't you want to do that? There's a lot of police departments that are like, yes, we'd love to do this, we just don't have the funding to do it. And so these things get put in there, and it's great for everybody. Because it takes away he said, she said situations. Like, well, here's the evidence. You can see it right here, plain and simple. So, you know what I'm saying? But yeah, racism is absolutely still a problem. So is sexism, for that matter. Women have a significant problem in terms of getting equality with men. One of the biggest problems is women get paid a lot less than men. You're aware of this, yes? It's not as bad, really, as some of the statistics make it out. For instance, there's that whole, a woman gets paid, I think it's 59 cents to every dollar a man makes. That's totally not true. It was never based on fact. It was just something someone threw together because it sounded catchy. In truth, a woman makes around 98 cents to every dollar a man makes. But here's the thing is, why wouldn't it be why would a woman get paid less? And there's actually two main reasons, and they're both cultural. Consider this. One, I think we already talked about this one. What careers are women encouraged to go into versus what men are encouraged to go into? Right, less paying jobs, and that sort of thing. The other thing, and this is something that is a little bit more devious, and I run into all the time, by the way, is women are encouraged to not be confrontational. Here's what happens. You get hired by a job, and you're getting paid a certain amount of money. Now, over the years, they like your work, and so they start increasing the amount of work you do for the company, but they never actually give you a raise. Men, statistically, will go to their boss and say, you guys aren't paying me enough, you need to pay me more, or I walk. Women will never do that. True story. There's all kinds of things you can do, by the way, because I realize that might be a bit confrontational. So one of the things I'm a big fan of is, let's say that you're kind of stuck in a rut in your job, you want to try to get more money, go apply somewhere else. If you get a job offer that's better, you take that to your current boss and say, hey, this person's ready to pay me this much, what will you do to keep me? You know what I'm saying? Yeah.
How come in some businesses they won't let you work at the same place in there?
That's because it can create problems. For instance, preferential treatment. For instance, like let's say that someone's a boss, the other's an underling. That's one problem. Another problem is, it can be an unprofessional situation because, it's like, oh, honey, things like that. Now, by the way, that's not absolutely true. Some places they will, but they insist on a layer of decorum. For instance, my wife, she used to work here as a sub. She doesn't do it anymore because we have kids, but, she used to do it all the time, and we always refer to each other as Mr. and Mrs. Muck. We don't talk about that way at home, but, this is just kind of a way of keeping it formal and businesslike. By the way, it's no different than when I work with friends, and I would call them Mr. Such and Such, because there's all managers and things like that. Just politeness. But,
I could do it, but I'm really so used to saying things, it's just like people's names.
I think one of the things we have to do, because a lot of people have that problem today, is getting comfortable with quiet. People are really unnerved by silence nowadays. Like, and actually you can use this as a tool whenever you're negotiating with somebody. Like seriously, it's hilarious. It's like, we're negotiating and I want to buy a car, and I'm like, how much were you thinking to sell it for? And she says, I don't know, like 60,000. I'm just like, right, I'm just quiet. She's going to be like, oh, just, how about 55? They'll offer a lower price. I don't even say anything. Silence is a great tool to use in this regard. But I digress. People tend to fill silence just because, oh my gosh, silence is freaky with it, and you don't have to. And actually what we find is, if you want to sound more intelligent, pause before you say something. Think about what you want to say and try to eliminate the, yeah, and things like that. I know it's not easy. I have that problem all the time. But if you take a second and think about what you want to say before you say it, it's like, oh, this person knows what they're talking about. We can all be lies, But I digress. One of the things I find very interesting in regards to women's and men's equality and the feminism movement as it comes out is this whole idea of, what are we really trying to do here? This whole idea of equality not necessarily being the same. That's really hard for us to quantify. It kind of comes back to the whole separate but equal thing with the civil rights movement. Can it be separate and still equal? The answer we came up with was no. It doesn't exist. But do we want to treat everybody the same and eliminate the idea of gender almost entirely? That's a hard thing for us to let go of. But anyways, that's it for today, guys. Tomorrow we read.
I love it.